Okay, it looks like everybody's on, so let's go ahead and get started. I call this meeting of the Historic Resources Committee for October 8th to order. Let's start with a roll call of members. I know that Jessica's not going to be able to make it today, and also there was some delay in communication about this, but Clay resigned from the committee in July. So we are now down to 9 voting members and our 3 ex officio members. Okay, so, well, myself, I'm here, obviously. That's Sally Duncan.
Here.
Margaret O'Brien.
Here.
Dee Dee Smith.
Here.
Genevieve Keller.
Here.
Jolene Schmidt.
Here.
Rachel Lloyd.
Here.
Kay Slaughter. And Heather Hill.
I'm here.
And oh, I should have also mentioned that Jeff and Robert are not in attendance today due to previous commitments. So Missy and Lasheen are running the meeting today from a technical perspective.
Right.
Okay, next on to the approval of the agenda. I'd like to actually add one thing, move one thing and add one thing. I'd like to add a discussion and vote on the honorarium after the approval of the minutes, and I'd like to move public comment to after the honorarium vote. Could I get a motion for that change?
So
motion.
Okay, I saw Kay first, so a second.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, please indicate. Okay.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, that passes. The agenda is approved. Let's move on to the approval of meeting minutes. Does anybody have any comments about the meeting minutes or changes or additions they'd like to see? Okay, seeing none, could I get a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Dee Dee. And second?
I second.
Thank you, Margaret. All in favor, please indicate. Any opposed?
Abstaining because I wasn't here.
That passes. The meeting notes are approved. Next, let's move on to the honorarium. Honorarium, I think we'd like to, we should have done this one before now, but we're just getting to it. So an honorarium for both Dr. Wilson today and approving an honorarium for the future for Dr. Bailey, should she be able to do a seminar for us. Jolene, would you like to make the motions?
Sure. This is just a little bureaucratic housekeeping. I know we've all talked about this before and thought it was a great idea, but it was brought to my attention by Phil that it was actually never quite approved. So in an official way, I would like to propose a motion to give an honorarium of $300 to Dr. Mabel Wilson, who will be speaking to us later in today's meeting in a consultative manner about how to do community engagement with descendants. Do I have a second? Yeah, okay.
I second.
Thank you, Sally, for that second. All in favor, please indicate. Any opposed? Not seeing none, the motion passes.
And if then I can propose a second motion, again, in the interest of housekeeping, that we've spoken about the possibility of extending an invitation to Professor Ann Bailey, the author of The Weeping Time, about the largest sale of enslaved persons in US history. to come and speak with us, kind of in a consultative manner, like what we're hearing from Dr. Wilson here later. I would like for the HRC to extend an invitation to Dr. Bailey and to offer, again, a $300 honorarium, if that is acceptable, and I make a motion to do so.
A second.
Thank you, Sally. All in favor?
Excuse me.
Oh,
Could we
sorry.
have-
Yeah, what, sorry, I forgot to ask for discussion on this.
I'd just like to clarify from Jelane's intent. I think when we spoke about this at the last meeting, that we would include a broader audience for that seminar. Is your motion sufficiently broad that it incorporates that so that we could make this available online in the future and include descendants and other interested community members?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And so that would mean perhaps having Dr. Bailey come at a time that's outside of our normal meeting time, that this would kind of be a public, I don't know, presentation, webinar, that's sponsored by HRC, kind of for the benefit of the community. That'd be great. It's kind of a question of, does city staff have the literal and figurative bandwidth to do that and to kind of promote it, so.
One possibility that came up was that the library has an existing series of which, like, the Penn Park research was one of the presentations that was part of that, that we could possibly engage with, because they have both the technical capability and have the ongoing publicity for that. And so that's one possibility that we could engage with.
I would love for us to do that, because in the past we would have some presentations or panel discussions, symposia, often in relation with a marker or something. And with the pandemic, we haven't been able to do those kinds of public events. So if we could do this virtually, I would love for us to be able to do that. And I know as you move on in the negotiations, if it would be possible to keep that on our website or excerpt portions of it for our website, so it would be ongoing community education as new people arrive and come to this topic, it would be available.
Absolutely. So perhaps when we ask Dr. Bailey, we can ask, for permission to record it, so that it's available, like that for our conversation as we go on. And I like the idea of having asking the library if they could kind of provide a technical forum for this. I think that's a good idea, and might relieve some pressure on staff, that has city staff, that is, it has a lot of work going on.
So do we need to amend the motion to incorporate that, Phil?
I think that'd be a good idea, to just broaden it to not specifically say that it's the same type of consultation that Dr. Wilson is doing right now.
Yeah, more of a kind of public presentation or
Yeah.
something, right, with questions from the public, and I like that. Let's see, how can we bundle this all into a motion? I move that the HRC seek with the public library to hold a public presentation by Dr. Ann Bailey. That would be supported by, I guess, library infrastructure. Yeah.
Although I think that's a little too specific, because we haven't actually.
Yeah. Okay. We haven't. Yeah. All right.
So I think we can actually just say, like, we agree to expend $300
Okay.
for engagement of Dr. Bailey in
Right.
some capacity.
All right. All right. And that we'll seek to work with the library, I guess.
And it
Is
would
that
be a
okay?
public forum.
Yeah. And have it be
A public forum. We might engage with others. I'd rather not limit it to the library, because maybe
absolutely.
the Heritage Center or some other group might want to, and then we'd have a broader audience.
Absolutely. The Historical Society also
Yeah.
comes to mind. Mhm. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, and working the publicity from all of these organizations, if they could have a hand in that, to their respective constituencies, that'd be good.
So maybe it should say something like engage with other partners and co-sponsors or something like that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jenny. Why don't you handle
Handle
this?
I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, please do, because
Yeah,
I
that's
feel,
great.
I don't feel like I can rephrase all that.
I move to amend the motion to include the provision that the HRC would seek to engage with other community partners and possible co-sponsors to make this a public forum that would be available to a broader audience and available in some form virtually on our website for a period of time.
Yeah. And that we appropriate $300.
And we appropriate $300, the most important
Yes.
part of the motion.
Right. Right. I second that motion.
Okay.
You just
Yeah,
have to accept the amendment, really.
Okay, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Second.
okay. Thank you, Kay. It's very useful to have somebody who actually understands the parliamentary procedure here. Says I certainly don't. Thank you. Dee Dee, you had a question?
Yeah, I think also just for the sake of good government, we do have the funds, right? Nobody actually said what the implication is for what funding we have. And I'm sure we do, but if Jeff were here, he would tell us what the implication is for our funds. But that said.
Oh, well, I can say that we have about $44,000 allocated right now. We have, the only outstanding thing I know of is we have 8,000 allocated towards the walking map. So it's a very small amount compared to what has been accrued over.
Yeah, no, that wasn't the point. The point was just thank you. That's exactly what we needed to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dee Dee. Okay, are there any other comments or questions about this motion? Okay, with that, all those in favor of passing this motion, please indicate such.
Yes.
Okay, and all opposed, none, seeing none, that's a unanimous pass of that allocation. Great, now let's move on to public comment. I'll pass, I'm actually not sure whether Missy or Lasheen is going to handle this, but I'll pass it off to whoever has the controls to do public comment.
I think I will. So at this time, if you guys have any comment you would like to make to the Historic Resources Committee, please hit the raise hand icon on your screen or *9 if you're calling in by telephone, and we will give you 2 minutes to speak to the committee. At this time, I don't see anyone that has their hand raised for public comment.
Thank you, Lasheen. We do have several attendees on the webinar and probably more on the streaming services. So that's great to see an audience for Dr. Wilson today. We've moved through everything so quickly that we're actually quite a bit ahead of schedule, and Dr. Wilson is not expected to be here until about 11:30. So I'd like to make a motion that we modify the agenda to discuss the downtown walking tour map update now, instead of doing that at the end.
So moved. Or second, whichever one is.
Yeah, I think it's such a perfunctory thing that it's okay for the chair to make that.
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
To do it without a motion.
All those in favor? So indicate. All right, that's unanimous. Okay, so downtown walking tour map update. I just had one thing to relay from Jeff and Robert, and that's that the city's working on the purchase order now. And they expect it to be done this month. That's all. So with that, I'll pass it over to Dee Dee and Kay for any updates.
Kay, you want to take this?
I'll just say that Anne is working on the map, so I hope the purchase order goes through. But yes, Dee Dee and I have had a really good exchange, and Dee Dee did a great sort of amassing of all of the sites on a spreadsheet. So I think we're in good shape, and we'll report back when we have the next in the next steps. as we get to it.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, you've actually seen some version of this spreadsheet. We have expanded it, and apologies for not sharing it. It's a little awkward because there's like 50 sites on it. So it's like way too many sites, but we've parsed them out, as we have told you before, in sort of 2 different ways: geographically, Court Square, downtown mall, and basically Market Street, which is our 20th century civil rights section. And then within that, we've, again, in the spirit of kind of using the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center map and the UVA enslaved laborers map as models, we've further broken down each of those areas into themes that will relate to sites. So I sort of hesitate to without really being able to say, this is what we're doing. But again, it's sort of iterative, and that's what Anne wanted. I mean, this is how it's going to work, is that she really wanted to see the sites so she can lay them out on a map, and then we can start seeing how things group. And I think it's great. Personally, I'm happy where we're going. It doesn't mean that we're ready to publish anything, but we will be ready to bring you something as soon as we get a template, which is what Anne's working on. And again, I mean, I reiterate what Kay said, is I hope that purchase order goes through, because we're just trying not to wait too long. I mean, it's going to take a while anyway, so it's just going on kind of forever. So she was cool with sort of getting a template started. So hopefully once we do that, things will start really rolling a little faster.
That's great. That's great. And I think that also answers one of the questions that Jeff had relayed about figuring out a prioritization for what are the most important sites to get on the map. That it sounds like you've already done that within those categorizations, so that you have a rough idea of how many sites are actually going to be on the map and which of the numerous ones should actually be selected.
Right. And just to say that it's not really likely to look it certainly won't look exactly like the old map. Nobody liked the old, the way the old map was organized. But it might not be, you are standing at this building and we're going to tell you when it was built and who owned it and who, I mean, that kind of thing. It may not really follow that model, but more being able to use multiple sites that are in the same area to convey the message. So that's kind of where we're going. Who knows? I think it'll really, as I say, flesh out as we have a template and we're working with Anne and we have the purchase order.
But she's also built into the process that, from working with many groups in the past, the time that it takes for not just people like Dee Dee and I to talk to her, but then when it comes back to the group and stuff. So she's very familiar with committee work. And so that will be built into our process as well.
We have lost a member with Clay.
Yeah.
Glad to know he didn't, he's okay. But so there is opportunity, both opportunity for more people to jump in to this more behind, I don't want to say behind the scenes, because once we have more than 2, then it can't be behind the scenes, but just keeping that open, particularly as it progresses. But we'll work on that. We'll work through that.
Okay, thank you for that. That also brings up another issue that we, in our newly passed modified bylaws, we have a maximum of 12 voting members. We're currently down to 9, and none were appointed at the last city council appointment cycle. So we have 3 open positions that we hopefully will have people come forward and want to participate. So.
And they weren't not appointed because we did not, there was no applicants for us to consider. So.
Yes, okay. That's actually what I had assumed. I
just want to make sure that's clear.
there were either no applicants or you made wise decisions on the applicants that did apply. Okay, we have about 10 minutes before we're really slated to start the descendant community discussion. Jelaine, would you like to move on to the Memory Project graduate researchers discussion now, or do you want to wait for Dr. Wilson to come on for that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm fine with introducing folks now, researchers now, and also yeah, might have a little bit of airtime, yeah, before our guest appears. Okay. Yeah. So I am, my other hat, my day job is as a professor of religious studies at the University of Virginia. I direct the Memory Project, which is under the Democracy Initiative. And at one of our projects there that we want to encourage is further research on the history of enslaved individuals, particularly in our community here in Charlottesville, Albemarle County. And this is something we've been talking about a lot at HRC and the public more generally here in Charlottesville. And we've had a number of community engagement meetings with descendants in early spring before the COVID shutdown. I guess that was in February 2020 with descendants, and then kind of stalled over, until we kind of got back on our feet virtually with virtual meetings. But then this spring and summer had several other meetings with descendants. And this was a way of consulting, doing community engagement, kind of hearing from descendants what they think about the slave auction block site, or sites, I should say, in the plural, in the downtown Court Square. What descendants advised, the input that we heard was that they didn't want to kind of move too quickly. They didn't want something that was kind of, I don't know, slapdash or just a plaque and just and moving on and kind of not really grappling with it. What they wanted was something that was thoughtful, that honored the humanity and of their ancestors, that some of whom were sold there, that connoted a certain human dignity. And that there be an educational component about that, and that what is lacking in order to kind of pursue that is that we don't really have a lot of information. We have the article by Gail Schulman and some other things that Phil has been doing some work on this. Sam Towler has for years been delving into the archives, and there are other folks too. I see Joan Burton here in the meeting here from Burke Brown Step, and there are others as well who've been doing this research. Anyway, but we're specifically interested in looking at the sales of enslaved persons down at Court Square to see what we can find out. And to that end, the Memory Project has hired 2 history graduate students at UVA who are specialists in their own right on the history of enslaved people. So I want to introduce, I see Medeja Leverett here, if you can raise your hand, Medeja, and I want to introduce her. And if you can just say a snippet, Medeja, about your own research or what attracted you to this particular project.
Yes, so I'm in my second year at the University of Virginia, and I'm particularly interested in early 19th century Black girlhood studies. So I look at when the transition from girlhood to womanhood occurred during their enslavement. So any opportunity to access the archive or to have a better understanding of the enslaved experience here in Charlottesville, since I'm here studying, was really something that captivated me with this project. And then also, as Jelaine has mentioned, to provide a humanizing experience for those who were sold at the auction block. Thank you for allowing me to join.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, and it's great, the focus of Medeja's research on girlhood and womanhood. We have numerous accounts from those sites down there from women, enslaved mothers, either, kind of in the advertisements themselves or in the tragic case of Maria Perkins, a kind of a plea, as her children are being sold away from her. So anyway, that's, that sensitivity is nice to have in this case. Jake Calhoun, who's the second graduate student in history, is not able to be with us because he is teaching a class, is a teaching assistant in a class which meets right now. His area of research is looking at enslaved folks in Louisiana and researching there. So we're really, and both Medeja and Jake come highly recommended to us by my colleagues in the history department and elsewhere in the university. We've taken special care to first kind of deploy Jake and Medeja out to various organizations, local organizations. I mentioned Burke Brown Stapp Afro-American Genealogy Group, the Historical Society, the Descendants of Enslaved Communities, Jefferson School, of course, and others to consult with historians that have already been doing the work so that we're not, kind of duplicating anything that's out there, but rather building upon. And so they've been making lots of appointments and going out and meeting people, like Andrea Douglas, like Sam Towler and many others, in order to kind of get a lay of the land and get pointed to in the right direction, to the archives and the kind of work, so that we're building on what's there. The goal is for them to do this research, and with our input, of course, with the HRC, to give kind of preliminary reports as they go along to these different community groups that they're talking with now. And then perhaps in late spring of next year to craft a report on their findings that could then be presented to City Council as we consider how to move forward with memorializing sales of enslaved peoples downtown. So anyway, we're really glad to have Medeja and Jake on board for this task, and it's I think a nice service to the city, to have these, kind of go-getter history graduate students out in the archives digging things up for us, and I really look forward to hearing what they have to say, what they find.
Thank you, Jelaine. I think this is the first time that we've been this far ahead of schedule in a meeting. I guess since we have a few more minutes, we could either move on to the agenda items near the end, or if anybody has anything they'd like to discuss prior to Dr. Wilson joining, we can also do that. Okay.
I have one question for Jelaine. Jelaine, could you tell us approximately how many people have been involved in the engagement so far, and where I think at some point you mentioned they're from around different locations, but have some roots in Albemarle.
Oh yeah, right. Let's see, in the 4 meetings or so that we've had, I would say we've probably had about 36 persons. And not, although all of them are descendants of locally enslaved people, they are residents. It was nice because we could do this on Zoom. We had people coming to the meetings from Toronto, from New York State, from South Carolina, and I think Georgia as well. So there was a nice mix of kind of local people that we all know, such as I see some of them present in our meeting here as attendees. Kind of local folks, and as well as folks in the diaspora, we might say, come in. So yeah, and we hope to keep collecting more feedback on a form that can online form that can be shared, and doing events like this. Right?
Are you connecting at all with the group that is working with librarians now?
No. I'm not aware of that.
It just occurred to me because in the course of some of my projects, I've come across links to the American Colonization Society, and we know that Monroe was, I think, at one time a president. And so it just seemed logical that there must have, there would be a great likelihood that people from Albemarle County were engaged in that process and actually were freed in our courthouse, right? So that they could then immigrants to Liberia. That would be a really kind of interesting component of study if it comes up. I mean, it's not your focus, but it would be very interesting if things like that come up to see, because it really does connect us to that as a national movement of the time that so many prominent Virginians, white Virginians, were part of.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and we of course anticipate that in the course of doing this research on enslaved persons, of course, the scope for our purposes, you know, since this is for HRC and kind of to inform HRC and then the city, they'll of course, you know, Jake and Medeja will of course, you know, run across lots of, you know, information, and there'll be, you know, lots of information about other enslaved persons and this sort of thing. So the goal here is to have them share information and that's why they've been deployed and are meeting, you know, historians, you know, from all, you know, from this area that are working on this, and that they will then share the data with, for instance, Shelley Murphy, who I see here in the meeting as well, you know, there at the university, who's, you know, doing research on descendants of enslaved workers at the university, certainly with the Jefferson School and the descendant community, and to be kind of self-conscious and to be working in concert with these folks as a, you know, some sort of database gets created so that this information is available, you know, to the public, but also that there's, you know, some sense of data sovereignty, as it were, which is, you know, kind of something that is becoming, you know, more and more important in public history work. And so to that end, they're in contact with the descendant groups and talking about what sort of database might be created.
That's all very intriguing. Thank you for including us in your studies and outreach. It's an amazing opportunity to be eyewitnesses to it.
Yeah.
Okay,
So we're waiting for Dr. Wilson to log in here.
we are.
Okay.
I guess while we're doing that, we can move on to some of the other agenda items. Were there any items for the November agenda that people would like to see discussed? I think the only.
I have a question
Yes.
offhand. I wondered if you and or Sally had received the correspondence about the PAPA meeting in December, and if the committee will be represented at that regional gathering online.
Yes, I'm going to do the presentation, and then Phil is also going.
Great. Very good.
I think one thing that we'll have on the November agenda is to try to catalog all the different historical areas that we have sort of been investigating over the last year, to try and create a summary, or, you know, a summary and a future directions for Vinegar Hill Park specifically, Penn Park, the Court Square work, and a couple of the other things that we've been working on, to sort of just collect those together and summarize where we are with those and what we're going to be doing going forward with them. Are there any announcements, upcoming events, lectures, research, or anything else? Oh.
Morning.
Hello, Dr. Wilson.
Hi, how is everyone?
Good. We're very excited to have you join us, and we will get started with this discussion.
It sounded like you were in the middle of wrapping something up. So.
Oh no, I was literally just trying to fill time. So we are very excited, and you have center stage now. Jelaine, would you like to start with an introduction?
Sure, yes. We're really glad to have Dr. Mabel Wilson back in Charlottesville, even if virtually. She's coming to us from New York City, where she is a professor in the School of Architecture at Columbia University. She's a graduate of UVA, Columbia, and got her PhD from NYU. And she's an architect and a designer and a scholar who does research on African American studies in the Institute for Research at Columbia. And the reason she's here with us today is that Dr. Wilson was integrally involved in the design and the community engagement process, which brought the University of Virginia's Memorial to Enslaved Laborers into being. And as the city considers what might be done with our own space downtown and in Court Square, spaces where enslaved persons were sold, we have been engaging already in some community input meetings with descendants to gather their thoughts about how memorialization, what it might look like there. But we thought it would be good to kind of check in with an expert here, with Dr. Wilson, who has done this sort of community engagement with descendant communities and the broader community, which resulted in something so positive and tangible, of course, which is the beautiful and award-winning Memorial to Enslaved Laborers at the University of Virginia. And so we just want to kind of turn this to you, Dr. Wilson, and to hear from you about how, what the engagement process looked like, what kind of distinguished it from, prior processes, and, what you learned, what advice you would have for going forward for us.
Well, thank you for having me and asking me about the process. I guess you guys have been in conversation with Frank Dukes.
Yes.
Clearly, and I credit Frank really with the amazing work that he had already done actually before he became part of our team. And I actually think that was essential to our success, was that we, there was already something, a set of relationships in place. There was already work being done to sort of wrestle with these difficult histories. And what I appreciate about Frank's work in particular, especially with UCARE, was that it sort of was linking the history of slavery with a lot of difficult issues of today. And that already gave us a sense that the memorial was not to forget or to mark a past, but as a way of understanding our present. And that was, I think, really important actually for how we wanted to think about the project. And then to have someone like Frank come in and just sort of bring his wealth of knowledge and collaborations, I think, with people both inside the university and within the larger Charlottesville community. So I think that was important. And two, that there was just a lot of work that was just being done around just understanding how, being able to talk about slavery. It's like you have to, in order to get people to remember it, they have to just even understand what it is. And I think that's really important work that has to be done before trying to even figure out what that is. And so I don't know the group at all. And exactly, from the information that you sent, I do know a little bit about. But I personally felt that, especially being somewhat of an outsider, that it was great to come in and not have a set of preconceptions, but actually walk into an already existing set of conversations that were difficult. And so I think that was critically important. And I mean, I could get a bit more detailed if that's helpful, but that's what I would say is really important.
Yeah, and as you said, you kind of entered into a conversation, that was ongoing. Of course, Frank, prior to engaging in the Memorial for Enslaved Laborers, was on the Blue Ribbon Commission for Race, Memorials, and Public Space. And we have here with us on the Historic Resources Committee, Margaret O'Brien, who also served on the HRC. Which gave a final report to City Council. So we have some experience here in this community, and I should say even that was predated by the dialogue on race.
Yeah.
Jelaine,
Yeah.
Jelaine, don't forget to mention Rachel also.
Oh, of course, right, Rachel. Sorry, Rachel was also on the Blue Ribbon Commission, right? And that was in 2016, and they gave a final report to City Council in 2017. Which led to this, consequential vote to remove our statues. Yeah. So
Bravo to you.
well, it was, it was a difficult conversation.
Yeah.
But anyway,
yeah.
we do have experience in this community, and as I was saying, this is predated by the dialogues on race, which was several years before that. And then, as you mentioned, you came in to kind of help, and Frank helped to facilitate conversations, community engagement about the memorial to enslaved laborers. So I feel like there's we have some experience. We've got our sea legs here in this community. It feels like, for having, I call it learning in public.
Yeah,
because we're, and it is kind of vulnerable, to have these conversations about, difficult issues. But I feel like, we have some experience with that, and we kind of want to keep pressing forward on it. So that's why we wanted to know, like, if you could say just a little bit about kind of what worked, and maybe, I don't want to say what didn't work, but what, where there's kind of space for improvement, on these, in these processes.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. And I think that Blue Ribbon report, which I teach and have actually shared with, the head of cultural affairs in, New York City, there was a group out in Los Angeles, and then like that, I think that was the best report because it just didn't pull punches, right? I think there's a way of couching the kind of language around histories of slavery, Jim Crow, racial violence in terms that are comfortable, and it's just not. And I think that Blue Ribbon report just kind of laid it out in terms of like, this is exactly what happened and why. And so I think it's really great work. And so I just wanted to say that because I just think it's important to acknowledge the hard work that's already been done. And it's not easy. And I, applaud you all for doing that. And that I feel is so necessary for then trying to figure out, all right, well, how do you mark something? The other, I think, thing that was really helpful, and again, I think Frank was in that, was kind of bringing in those who are descendant from that, from the community, in dialogue, those who knew that they might have been descendant from that, and then those who were genuinely interested in that history and may have later discovered, or maybe not be descendant, but clearly have some sort of connection or interest in the history of the Black community in Charlottesville. And, trying to draw that wisdom in, and also them as stakeholders, is super helpful. And again, you shared that really great report from Montpelier about how to work with descendant communities. So it's clear that you're already thinking about that. And I would say that was the other part of it. But I would just say as designers, it's sometimes very easy to come in with a set of preconceptions about what should be done. And what was great was we didn't know. And I think part of it was because UVA didn't know either. They didn't have, usually your client comes in, they've already hired someone to do preliminary work to come up with like a program booklet or something that says, this is maybe what you need to the budget. This is where you want to cite it. Here are some options. This is what this might mean. And then they go out and they look for a firm to essentially carry that out. And what was interesting and unusual was that UVA didn't have any of that. They had no sense of where this was going to go, how much it was going to cost, what it should be. And they actually hired us to sort of help figure that out. And that was a huge risk. But I think because it was open and wasn't hemmed in by maybe more conventional processes, it allowed for a kind of invention in the process. And I think that's, and it also just allowed UVA to try to figure out for themselves like what it was that they needed and thought should be in dialogue with other stakeholders. And that could have been very risky, actually, very, very risky.
So what I hear you saying is that kind of being open, not only, I mean, you said, you know, the design firm itself, but also in this case, the client, which was UVA, you know, just kind of coming into this and that this kind of allowed I don't know if this is okay to say, but a kind of breathing of life into the project. I mean, the result is beautiful. I mean, it's, you know, it's gained accolades, all sorts of awards. And, you know, and this is, you know, likely a result of the process that informed the design. And I think, yeah, not having the preconceived notions and the risk that is, but that, yeah, when there's risk, the payoff, you know, can be great. But yeah, like you said, you know, what were the fears, I guess, you know, in kind of leaving it open ended?
You wouldn't come up with anything. I mean, there was a fear like, well, and we didn't have a lot of time, right? And so this is a lot of open parameters, I think, to try to sift through in a very short period of time, you know, in what we could clearly see was a very charged context, right? And so, you know, and often, you know, kind of understanding as we started going along that, you know, folks in the Black community think of UVA as the plantation, right? Like, it's still complicated. And that's why I liked, you know, the fact that UCARE was a part of it, because I think as a team, we wanted to be able to engage that, but then to already know that had been part of the conversation, again, just gave us a kind of leg up. We didn't have to do the work. It was already kind of done, and it was incredibly rich. And, you know, and I do think that that's my sense, because I was there for the, I did something for Andrea Douglas at the Jefferson School when the marker for the EGI was put up. And, you know, even at that moment in that space, you could see, you know, people were grappling with those histories, with, you know, what did this mean with the, you know, with the dot, and that this wasn't a beginning, it was in the midst of a process, right? And so, yeah, I think that's really, I mean, I think you guys are kind of maybe a model for how communities can do this work. I hope somebody's kind of an anthropologist, a sociologist, somebody is sort of keeping track of this whole thing in terms of like how a community wrestles with a lot of these issues, but not just once, but multiple institutions. Because oftentimes it's kind of like a one and done, we're done, right? We've got that out of the way and let's move on. But my sense is that within Charlottesville, there's a lot of ways in which, you know, the history of the city is being really rethought, leveraged to understand what's not there, what's not been said, you know, and what can that do to help resolve clearly trenchant issues around inequities and legacies of violence.
Yeah, I think part of what helps, I mean, of course, being a university town, you know, we have a, you know, kind of appetite, you know, for engaging in this, but and also kind of being a part of this Central Virginia public history ecosystem. I mean, we have the, you know, kind of 3 presidential mansions, we have, you know, the Civil War Museum in, you know, in Richmond, you know, there's a lot going on here. You know, there's a lot of interest and a lot of experience and expertise, you know.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you know, we spoke with people right away at Montpelier. We spoke with folks at Monticello, you know, like realizing there was this like incredible crucible here, right? Of, you know, early American history that was really being grappled with. And, you know, that clearly this is a model for perhaps how, you know, other communities and other regions might engage this question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have some kind of nuts and bolts things to propose to us about what an engagement process, you know, should definitely include, and what cautions also would be, just kind of real practical aspects?
I do think it was helpful that we did public forums of all sizes in terms of, speaking to people who would be we talked to students, different groups of students and faculty. The events that we had at the Jefferson School where we were presenting the design, but we did, we went to different churches and spoke with people and got to know folks. We had an online survey that was super helpful, and that drew in actually a lot of students or alumni, right? I mean, we had many different ways of just trying to hear people and to hear what people had to say and to be in dialogue. And that's one of the things that I've learned a lot from Frank, is that people want to know that they've been heard. And that's really, really important. And it wasn't only helpful for us as we sifted through all of this. I mean, this is a lot to do between, I would just say the first round between mid-October, now 5 years ago, and just January. By the time we started to try to design something, we had many, many, many meetings in different formats, actually. And continued to have those throughout the process, all the way to the end. We had a descendant meeting, about the trees and the site, right? So we were constantly negotiating and listening and understanding what was it that people wanted or expected. And that, I think, was really important. But it wasn't just one format. It was just different kinds of formatting, that where we were talking, sometimes it was a dinner. Sometimes it was just meeting people in a particular space and talking, or just meeting in a church, not with a lot of people, but with a small group. Sometimes it was going to, after Sunday sermon, the sermon, and having lunch with the congregation. So, but in that we were able to, hear and speak with people about what they were thinking and what they might envision.
That sounds like a lot of time, dedicating a lot of time. I mean, this was you and Feto Otatigbe, yeah, who's the artist.
Yeah, it was initially, it was Frank, Greg Bleem, Mijin Yoon, Eric Howler, although Mijin was the partner in charge. So it was really the four of us initially, and Anna Kartner, who was the project architect at the time. And then once we got the project approved, Eto came on about a year into the project, and then Eto did also join these but they were ongoing the entire time we were working on the project. So yeah, so it wasn't sometimes architects will do charrettes with communities, get input, and that's it. But for us, it just turned out to be an ongoing process. Even in the design process, I think we had a meeting in the January of 2017, came out with first designs, just testing sites and forms and language. And we had a meeting at the Jefferson School just to hear kind of what people were leaning toward, what they thought, what they, and these were recorded, and we went through them, and, and then we came back with ideas, and, so there was a back and forth even in the design process to help us understand kind of what people were expecting. And to the point where there was one presentation I'll never forget, where we finally were like, yay, we have a site, we have a form, we ended up where we were, which was the area called the Triangle of Grass. We had a form, and while people were like, great, it's so abstract, we don't understand, what does this have anything to do with where's the enslaved community? We want a statue, and we want names, and we want to see, and that was a useful charge, right? And so, that's how we start to think about, well, what could we put on the exterior? And that's where Eto came in. How do we name names, which is a whole other process? How do we write this history, which is a very violent one? So those dialogues, kind of set into play, ways to think about what the memorial had to do and to whom it had to speak.
Yeah. Do you have any cautions to offer?
I mean, I would just say be open, realize it's a creative process. Our process, I don't know, may or may not work in terms of what you were thinking. I think it worked to some extent because it was the university, its institution in relationship to Charlottesville, right? And so we had to think about what that is. Plus, even within the institution, there were staff, students, faculty, administrators, there was a whole also ecology within it. So we had to kind of devise ways of working inside and outside the institution, and especially figuring out what a descendant community what this might mean to descendants of this enslaved community. And then in the process, just even developing language and terms by which we could talk about things and understand things. And so it was very much something that was always kind of in process. So, and sometimes that's hard because it's creative and it's hard. You don't quite know what's coming out on the other end, but that's the creative process. You don't know. You're creating something new. And it's exciting, but it can also be daunting.
Are there other HRC members that want to pose some questions to our guest? I see Jenny with the hand up there.
Yeah.
Jenny, do you want to? Yeah.
Yes, yes. Well, it's very nice to see you again. We chatted briefly when we were on the program together with Frank Dukes and Beth Meyer at the Race and Space Symposium years ago.
Oh yeah.
And so it's very nice to see you, and thank you so much for coming to inform us today. You touched on it a little bit in your most recent remarks. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the transition from engagement to the design process. I think the university and the city really were starting from similar places. Both had plaques or markers embedded in a sidewalk. And then that led to something much, much larger in the case of the university.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned, and I was at some of the informational and engagement sessions and heard people stand up and make pleas for statues. And so how did you manage the issues of scale and location? I know you had 5 or 6 different sites at the university that you might do. We have the constraints of the narrow space, the narrow public space adjacent to the auction house that has been most identified as a place of sales. There's also the Court Square area there in general. So we have a range of places. So there are constraints of space, or there are opportunities for larger spaces. And also just in your mind, because you know Charlottesville and the university so well, are there ways that we might link or take advantage of the process that has already been undertaken at UVA so that this could be kind of an evolution or continuation of that?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of where we are. We know we want more than a marker, but we don't know exactly what we want as a community and how much engagement is enough engagement, and are we asking the right questions so that a designer can use that to give us something that's appropriate for the scale and space and budget that we might ultimately have.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And maybe 2 points. One would be, we were the design team, but we also kind of had another team within the university's Office of Architecture with Alice Rauscher and Mary Hughes and Sarita Herman. That was super helpful to have architects inside the university who knew the power structure and could also leverage internally some of these issues and questions, and particularly with the Board of Visitors. That was really critical for getting this approved. And that's why I felt like even when we had that meeting in June 6th of 2017, it was like, okay, we were a design team, but we understood we were just part of a cohort of people trying to make this work on many different ways. And I think that's super helpful, is to imagine, what are all of the groups that you're going to need to be able to manifest this thing, and that people can do their work within their respective institution or community is helpful. And when we were thinking about the memorial, we thought about a larger memorial landscape. So we even have a slide that says, maybe, freedom and Liberation Day would start at the courthouse, at the auction block, and move through the city, pass through the site and onward. So we saw it as part of a larger commemorative landscape. We also heard, comments from our engagement that slavery wasn't in one place, it was everywhere. We thought about a distributed logic to the project and what that might mean. And maybe the remnants of that are the 48 stair, walkway that goes outside, to say, it's a flight, it's a line of flight of escape, but it's also a way of saying that world was everywhere. And so it wasn't just this spot, but many spots. So, that's maybe something to conceptualize. That's why the EJ marker is really very, very, very smart project to say, okay, so we have this memorial here, that speaks to the legacy of lynching, but this happened all over the place. And so how do we mark those other sites, right? And to set up this dialogue with, all of these communities where this happened. And I think, that was very strategic. And so that distributed might be, we looked at, there's a beautiful commemorative project called Stumbling Stones, the Stolperstein by Gunther Domnick is the name of the artist. And if you've seen them, they're incredible. If you're in Europe and you see these little brass plates that will have a name and they'll be in front of a building. And it usually meant that was somebody that was displaced from that site by Nazism. And it was the Holocaust, but there were also people who were forced to flee. There were also a number of people who were persecuted by the Nazis, and it marked their home. So I'm in Oslo and all of a sudden, boom, there's one. And so it's very arresting when you come across them in series or, and there are thousands of them all over Europe. I think there are now 20,000, some thousands and thousands of these things. And that people can write to Domnick and his team and say, we want one. And then there's a process that you have to go through in order to understand why you would have it. The municipality has to be engaged. And so it's a really interesting, so that's another model. And so we were looking at all of these different things and trying to think about how we, we're like, what is this kind of larger commemorative landscape? So that might be something to think about as well.
Go ahead.
Dr. Wilson, I was wondering, you're reminded by some of your comments just now. I'm not familiar with all the aspects of the long haul of this project, but was there a point at any point within the whole process that specific ideas from different designers or input was solicited, and did that occur after the decision had been made about the single site for the memorial, or just how did that work, if at all?
You mean other architectural firms?
Well, yes, I guess the upshot is, I guess my curiosity is, was the decision made for your firm to when your firm was selected, that meant the decision about all further developments were going to be made by your firm in consultation with other people and groups that were going to be supplying input locally?
I think the process was, there was a request, because it was a state project, a request for qualifications. And that was, there are these very formal processes through which, projects are tendered, basically. And so that went out. Mijin and Eric, who have a firm, Haller and Yoon, responded. They were shortlisted. I think there were 4 other firms shortlisted. Those were all landscape architecture firms. At that time, then Mijin and Eric put together a team. And so they invited me as a designer and as a historian to join, along with Frank Dukes and Greg Bleen, who is a local landscape architect. So that was the original team. We interviewed for the project. We came and we presented and said, these are some of the things that you should think about. for this work. And we were then awarded the contract to do the project as a design team. And then, along the way, in any design project, you then have to bring in, consultants to help with lighting or surveying or, aspects of it. So you build a team around a project. And then, as part of the development of the design, we organized a series of meetings that were ongoing as part of that. So I don't know if that answers the question around process.
Yes, it does. Yes. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I would. Yeah, I mean that's how it worked for us, because this was a state. It's a state school. That's the process the state goes through. I would just say it was unusual that there was just they hadn't figured out the budget. They didn't specifically know. That's why I think they must have thought it was going to be something more landscape-like, which is why there were 4 landscape firms and 1 architecture firm. We were the group led by an architectural firm. And there was no site given, so that was also just unusual.
Okay.
One question I have related to that is, I think the most surprising thing about the outcome from this project to me was that UVA allowed that space specifically to be the site, because it is such a prominent and important space. Was that surprising to you, or did you come into this process expecting that it would be something that significant?
Well, we had 3 sites, including like 2 split sites on the lawn. So the fact that they were willing to put something on the lawn was like, which is, I'm a UVA grad. It's like, it's like sacred ground. And then in front of the library, which is where the anatomical theater was, and then this triangle of grass where nothing was, which seemed to have been agricultural or perhaps provision garden, right, historically. And one of the reasons I think we ended up there was the scale of the site, but also, we got the sense that people in the Black community were not going to be willing to go onto the lawn. It wasn't accessible. They didn't feel comfortable. We heard a lot of people say that, actually. And I remember there was one, Patrice, I cannot think of her name, she's in education, and at UVA kept saying, yeah, it really needs, I like the triangle of grass area because it's closer to it's more accessible to the ways that people might access it, and that the lawn is not. And I think she was right. And it also just gave us a kind of open field that we actually could start to make something of scale in ways that we couldn't do if we had picked those other sites that were busy traffic, where buses are, or in relationship to the end of pavilions 9 and 10. I think, yeah, it just, when we finally looked at everything, I was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. But we had to be able to figure it out. And it was great that we had the opportunity to sort of think about that. And it was great because by posing the lawn, we found out, like how people feel about that legacy, what's their perception, and the fact that UVA was kind of open and not said that this is where it has to be specifically, this is what we've put aside, but had several sites that we could think through, not only with them but with the larger community.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Sure.
Well, speaking of sites, maybe something, and you can see this slide that's been put up here on our screen, kind of looking at the spaces. So there is, on this, if you can see here, I don't know if my cursor is showing up. There's a building, the Number Nothing building, this brick building that's.
I love that term. I was like, the Number Nothing building.
Yeah, there's a history to that the street number system had already been established, and numbers 1 and 2, were already taken. And so I guess that's why they attached it, or at least that's my understanding. So this is the former site of Benson Brothers Merchants. They were an auction house and, sold, all sorts of things, and also sold humans. And from what we've gathered on this side here, on the kind of nearest, I don't know how to point this out, where that car is,
Mhm.
is from an article that we have. Apparently there was kind of a block there, you know, you know, a rock of some sort.
Yeah, I've actually seen the plaque. Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. I know exactly
Plaque
what you're
has
talking
since
about.
been,
Yeah.
it was removed. So, I mean, so this is actually just one site in Court
Yeah.
Square, but it is the only kind of extant site, you know, the other kind of in front of the Swan Tavern and the Eagle Tavern and other spaces. They're now, you know, not the original buildings, but this is, you know, the community's kind of invested a lot of significance in this spot, you know, although it's just one of many, including the courthouse steps, you know. You know, the original building is there, but the facade has been built out since, is my understanding. So this is, you know, a space that we have down there, and I feel like, you know, sometimes in our discussions that we have both at HRC and then also in consultations, I think we kind of allow our thinking to be limited by these spaces. You know, this is a very, you know, we have, you know, sidewalk around here. You know, there are ADA concerns. You can see there that there are pots of flowers there that have, you know, community members have really grasped on to this site and have been very insistent about what they want to memorialize. And of course, you know, as our discussions about Confederate monuments has raged, you know, this has become even more to the fore, you know, memorializing enslaved people. So I feel like sometimes we allow our thinking to be limited. Like, you know, you were talking about, you know, having this triangle of space there, and this was one of 3 proposed sites that UVA had, you know, including the lawn or including over there by Alderman Library, you know, where the anatomical building used to be. But you said by having that triangle that it kind of opened up possibilities, that the site was just kind of more open, or this sort of thing. And I wonder how we can encourage ourselves on HRC and with, you know, consultations with descendants to kind of be more open in our thinking, you know, kind of to not let our thinking be limited by this physical site that we're seeing before us here.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the tough challenges of the project is, you know, like with UVA, we knew, well, it's kind of what we didn't know. We still don't know who was there, but we know people were there. And so, and we have records of kind of what people were doing. You know, it's possible to start to piece together a community there. And toward the end, you know, it started to become clear. It's kind of what we ended up making was like, you know, like what we assembled together was a register of the 4,000 of this community that we can know nothing about, you know, and Isabella Gibbons is a perfect kind of cipher because we do know her first and her last name. She left a written record. There's this photograph of her, right? And the record is actually her remembrance. So she can speak for the community that's not there, right? And so the memorial, you know, in retrospect really was that, it has become that. And I think that's because, you know, we had to rehumanize that community because it was dehumanized by the ledgers, by the ways in which the letters and, you know, the slave, you know, the way in which slavery worked. You weren't a person, you were a piece of property. And so that's how you were referred to, and that's dehumanizing. So, you know, how do we make this community? And that's why we ended up with the, you know, the term mother and daughter, and, you know, to say that there were relationships here and that they actually worked. What did they do? I think this is tough because it's an auction block, right? And so it is ground zero for that process of dehumanization, along with the slave hold. So I think thinking about that violence, that legacy, that and how you might try to rehumanize, given that that's what this is marking, might then call for other kinds of sites to be marked or ways of engaging, and not just marking the slave auction block, because that is the site in which you are simply reduced to numbers. That is capitalism ground zero. That is dehumanization ground zero, right? You know, you're captured, brought over, and then sold, or, you know, you're at a plantation somewhere and then you're sold. Like it's exactly that site of commerce that is being marked. And I think that for me, raises a number of questions that, for example, a site like UVA doesn't. And I think it's a much more difficult site to mark, actually, because of the inherent violence and abstraction of the human into property.
That's helpful to think about, that maybe we shouldn't be so fixated on.
It's a tough site to mark. Yeah.
Yeah, and also given that it's also surrounded by courts buildings, and
Yeah.
that is also like a significant dehumanizer in the non-delivery of justice in many cases.
Right, and what the law does. I mean, there's a reason why Notes on the State of Virginia, you know, the longest diatribe that Jefferson writes on slavery is in laws, right? Because the law is what determined, you know, property relations. So that's why it's in property relations.
You talked about connecting UVA to the issues of today. We have an opportunity here to connect the legal system of yesterday to the ongoing daily legal life of our community, which still occurs in this place and all around the place.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And that might be a great way to look at it, you know.
It's also a physical constraint because you have people and cars, and you will have visitors, you will have people trying to memorialize, and you have people just trying to get to court on time.
But the legacy of that legal system, right? If like Cheryl Harris's whiteness is property. I mean, there are all these amazing, you know, ways in which that's being. I had to teach a short book called On Property by Ronaldo Walcott, who's actually a poet, about the legacy of property and the legacy of that plantation logic today. But that's exactly policing, mass and I mean, it's all, as we all know, it's connected to that. Yeah, Whiteness is Property is actually a critical race theory by Cheryl Harris. It's a long essay, and I think Harvard Law Review is where it first appeared, and then it was included in the Critical Race Theory Reader. But this might be kind of an opportunity to maybe engage with that, because I you know, and you know, having worked on this and just the scholarly stuff I've been doing on slavery, is that the common perception of like the slavery is gone with the wind, right? You've got some plantation in Louisiana and it's far, far away, and you know, and you can critique that, but I think now people are like, no, slavery was everywhere, like the legacy of it and the wealth that was created by a transatlantic trade, the concepts of racial difference that have emerged, they're all still with us. And, you know, like maybe thinking about like, what does it mean to kind of mark the site of the sale is a really good question. And how, you know, how has that, you know, is there any kind of equivalent kind of marking that's going on?
I wonder, you know, you're raising some really interesting questions, and what I'm going to say probably is it's still like looking at those spots where the sales took place. But I wonder, you know, as I look at this map and it's sort of these discrete different places, if there might be some way, and again, I almost feel like you need a designer helping people to think anew about it, but where spaces might be brought together in a kind of area, if you will. So for example, what Jolene was pointing out next, number nothing, and where the car is and stuff, that part of the street might no longer be a street. It might be turned into something else. And it might also connect over to the courthouse, you know, in some way that it would be a walking place. But it's interesting because it's almost like you need a whole new way to think about it. Like here was a place that was selling people in a number of spots. It's not just number 0, but a number of spots where the Albemarle hotel was and stuff. So whether or not we could then reconceptualize that space as a memorial, and sort of in the same way the Montgomery Memorial, the E.J.I. Memorial kind of transcends in some sense the horror. I mean, it doesn't transcend, it brings it to you, but there is a way that it becomes a memorial and not only a mausoleum.
Mhm. Yeah, I think maybe thinking through, just trying to drop a link in that would be useful. Find it. All right. Okay, found it. Let's see. So this is, for example, sorry to go kind of history geek on everybody, but
No
This is
apologies
just,
necessary there.
That's why
Yeah.
you're here.
this is this abolition poster about Washington, D.C., done by, I think, New York abolitionists. Sort of pointing out that what most people don't realize in the 1830s, 40s, well, 20s, 30s, and 40s, Washington, D.C., including Arlington, was a major slave market. Actually, there's a really great book that came out on the market in Alexandria, rather. And so the market, where the auctions were happening weren't just, there was a whole like landscape of how this worked, from the jails or the barracoons to the taverns to the block. And Solomon Northram's story, 12 Years a Slave, sort of gives you a sense of what that landscape would be. So maybe thinking about multiple markers and how that operated, and this was between the Capitol and the White House, was this huge market of slavery going on in between that, right? And so, where slave coffles are literally marched in front of the White House, but that's because that was the labor force. That's who rebuilt the Capitol after it burned in 1818 in the War of 1812. So maybe thinking about not the block, but maybe the landscape that maybe you could start to point out where other things were, could be a kind of strategy kind of around understanding that relationship both to commerce and the law. But then I would ask, how do you humanize it? How do you rehumanize those who might? Because that's where they're really at their most basic condition as property, right? Because at least at UVA, there's a life, right? There's work, there is a community, but here it's a kind of complete stripping away of that. And so how do you capture their humanity and descendants perhaps of those who might have been here as well?
And it may be, as Jelane's students do more work, we are able to create more complete and continuing narratives out of this space, because there is a legal record that a sale occurred, and might be possible at times to be able to trace the journey of that person beyond this place, whether that place for them remains Albemarle County or is somewhere else. We have opportunities for more human narratives here that are more than this one indignity, this one moment in time, because it's really about a whole life and a whole family and that whole trajectory.
Yeah, that work of how do you recognize the humanity in this space of an attempt to strip it away, and this is something that in our community engagement with descendants that they've insisted upon, is to recognizing the human dignity of those who were sold here. And I think, narratives can be powerful, I think, in some of this. We do have, we have the recorded words of Fountain Hughes, formerly enslaved, about sales in Court Square. Rebecca McGinnis, I guess, too, was interviewed and, kind of recounts what her grandmother told her. This is a centenarian woman.
I realized Fountain Hughes was Charlottesville, actually.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that recording. Yeah. Wow.
Right. And then what I mentioned before, the letter from Mrs. Maria Perkins, an enslaved mother who was going to be sold. You know what I mean? So we do have some, pretty tactile
Yeah.
reports, but there's not a lot of direct words, of the enslaved, of the folks who were
Yeah.
affected by this. But I wonder if some use might be made of it, and this kind of becomes a stand-in story, much as you described for Isabella Gibbons, there for the monument, the memorial for enslaved laborers. There's just not a lot of words from the enslaved themselves, but here was something from the written record where she is recalling the experience of enslavement, and is that kind of a way to kind of embody this humanity and to humanize folks, to kind of use the narratives that we do have?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, no, absolutely. And
I'm-
questions
yeah.
of whether they resisted, refused, what was their agency would be another question.
We do have a sort of a more expansive story if we are, in the end, willing to go beyond just the slave auction block, which is that period after Jefferson died when his his enslaved were sold. A few were freed, not very many, but then they went about, particularly the Fawcett's, trying to buy back their families. I mean, it's a very powerful story that takes place very close to here. It's getting a little bit farther away from it's certainly farther away from just talking about the auction block, although that is where some of those enslaved were sold. We know that. But there's a really powerful story of both the free people of color, freed people of color, and then the enslaved in that we're talking like between 1800 and the Civil War. And right here in kind of this site. So I do wonder, I guess my question in that is, should we really be thinking beyond just the singular issue of the enslaved being sold on Court Square, or should we really try to expand the story? And should we consider looking farther beyond just those sites where people, men, women, and children were sold to, like our parks? There's a park right there that used to have Stonewall Jackson in it, no longer does, and a second park that had Robert E. Lee and no longer does. And there's another whole movement to re-envision those parks. So how much should we just stick to the one question of the slave auction block? And particularly if we're going to go through a very big process, should we be more expansive? And I just wonder if you have an opinion on that.
I mean, I think it's just up to you in terms of, how you want to frame the project, or maybe you think about these things as you bring somebody in, who might be a designer. You can start to maybe work through those questions. And maybe it is a time to kind of recognize this auction block and to kind of think about how does one mark a site like that, which is very complicated, but has a history that could be told. And so I'm just bringing this up just to kind of maybe think about, these are the kinds of processes that we went through in design. Like, what happens if we go outside the site? What happens if we stay? How, all of these can be factors that then help you determine to get to where you want to end up.
And I just wonder too, have you in your experience come across some memorials, movements, ways that just have struck you as being particularly interesting? But you mentioned the stumbling block for the victims of the Holocaust, which I was just looking at that website. That is very cool. Other kind of examples that you might want to share or not?
Wow. I mean, there's a ton of things that we looked at, but the Stolpersteins for us, I think, were really powerful because they were just so everyday. They didn't try to make a huge statement. They're just there, and that they're very participatory because people have to ask to have them placed, and there's a whole process. So we really liked that, you know, that idea of like, how do you mark people's lives? And especially so everyday folks, and, you know, things happened to them, thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So, and it's just a unique project and process. And so that's the one that really just always comes forward when we're thinking about these as well. You know, there's of course the Vietnam Veterans Memorial by Maya Lin, you know, that's very powerful. You know, and also just what the EGI has done is also, you know, as a model, very compelling. You know, but they're speaking about different histories, they take very different strategies. And so, you know, it's thinking through, you know, what you're attempting to commemorate, the community, the scale, like it's just, I think it's just something you'll have to figure out or determine, because every context is going to be so different.
Kind of my takeaway from that, and especially as you described the earlier process of the Memorial for Enslaved Laborers at UVA, was just that just coming into it so openly, like you said, not even a site had been selected, which is, you know, so unusual. As you say, you know, most clients, you know, here's where we want to do it, here's our budget, you know, and you kind of go, but that kind of openness that it allowed for, you know, a really innovative design, you know, and that's kind of a takeaway that I have here. I want to respect Dr. Wilson's time, but you know, if there's anything else, any other additional question, I think we want to say thank you to our guest here for coming and to help us think out loud, as I call it, you know, thinking in public.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. It's total pleasure to, you know, kind of hear where you are and what you're thinking through. And I just hope, you know, my comments have been helpful. I would just say the one thing that we were terrified of was that the university just wanted something with brick and white columns. We're like, we are not that team, sorry.
Yeah, right, okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, we might be calling you in again, you know, as we move forward.
Sure.
And
Yeah,
really-
I think this raises, you know, just some really challenging and interesting questions, you know, again, about how we connect with this history of slavery. So, yeah, great. Well, good luck.
All right, thank you so much.
Take care. Have a great weekend. Bye.
Okay. I guess I'll open the floor if anyone had any additional discussion that they wanted to do just within the committee about Dr. Wilson's comments. I know for me that was very meaningful, and I think that it, for me at least, opened up quite a different perspective on how to look at this process and engagement. So.
Yeah, I thought, and I didn't ask this question because I thought I probably should know the answer, but kind of where in time these different efforts were. I know the dialogue on race sort of came early and kind of kept reemerging, but where the Blue Ribbon Commission was compared to when she did her work, and you know, how much each of those, and now we have her and her team that she was so very generous in thanking so many different people, but we have that wealth of information too, and you know, how much that can then inform both our process, but also, you know, what's being considered. Anyway, you know what I'm saying? So I don't know, is the Blue Ribbon Commission before or after?
Before. I mean, my sense of the timeline is that the dialogue on race began in 2010, you know, kind of a series of conversation. The Blue Ribbon Commission was in 2016. And I guess, yeah, the final report was submitted to City Council in December of 2016. And then the vote was taken in early 2017. So that was curious to me because she mentioned, Dr. Wilson did, a meeting taking place in January of 2017, which was right around the time when City Council took that, very consequential vote, in February, voting to remove the Lee statue, and so this is, and then she mentioned another meeting in June of, let's see if I can find that here. So she said that they had a June 2017 meeting with the design team that was part of a larger cohort there, so there, this is during, right during as the summer of hate, is going on here, and then the vote on the BOV to choosing, that chose Haller and Yoon was, a bit before that, and then kind of, going forward and, what did it take? 18, 24 months to build, I think, something like that, it's quite a process. And it was supposed to be officially inaugurated, I think, last April in 2020, but of course, it was put off until this year. So yeah, so this is, it's going on at the same, it's kind of, I'm seeing a kind of slight overlap on these things, that are going on, but it seems like it's keeping the appetite whetted, I think, for public engagement on these issues, or at least among a section of our community that is inclined to do that. But I think that's part of it is this kind of making it a continual invitation. But yeah, I'm seeing dialogue on race, BRC, MEL, kind of in that order, but since 2010. So we've got about a decade's experience here,
And Jelaine, how much do you envision the efforts by Montpelier and, or rather, I'm thinking Highland as well, and Monticello, as it, how much do you envision working with them, because it probably overlaps with our descendant conversations? I mean, I don't know how much, if that's going on at all now.
Absolutely, we're going to have to find out more, but certainly, I mean, like with the largest recorded sale that we have here is, of course, that that January 1829 sale of the from Jefferson's estate, those 33 individuals. So yeah, that directly connects with Monticello, and I'm sure there's lots about, Phil, you found some notices, I think, in the paper, right, by various of the presidents around here selling people.
Yeah, we know about the couple from I think I'd seen the previous ones about the Monticello related sales, and then there was another one from Monroe's estate.
Yeah,
that I believe was while he was still alive.
Right, and the the Montpelier too. I mean, the kind of ne'er-do-well son that kind of sold off the estate there. Yeah, that would be interesting to check. Was that in Orange County or was that in yeah. I don't know. I guess we'll just have to find out. But yeah, this I think you're making me think, Dee Dee, that in addition to deploying our team, Jake and Medeja, to these various organizations here in town, it would warrant a conversation maybe with Gail Jessup White, out there at Monticello, and some of the other presidential, maybe the folks with the descendant community there as well, and other places. So that's should keep that in our sights as well. I think you're right.
I wonder if we could move away from history and back to design, which is really why we invited Dr. Wilson, because she's the designer who used engagement to bring a project to execution, wrong term, but going through the whole design process. And if it would be possible for us to secure her services on a limited basis to help us design the engagement that would bring us to a site selection. I'm very interested in the decentralized monument as a way to deal with the spatial and ownership constraints of the site that we have as our focus. So maybe that's a way that site could still be the focus, but we can move out from there in various ways that only, as Kay and Dee Dee have found working with a graphic designer for the tour, if we had someone work with us to help us evaluate the sites that are available to us because they're publicly owned or accessible or somehow able to come into our network of sites and design what it is that we could work with. And then, because we're going to continually for the next decades have new historical information, and how can this even be a project that just as UVA evolves so that new names can be, or categories of types of occupations, whatever kind of identifying information they have, they can build that in. We have something that lets us continue to build our narrative as well. But if we could have a tightly defined small project of work with a designer in terms of site selection and what would be our opportunity for a more decentralized monument that still shines some light on that place that's become iconic in our community. I don't know how we move that forward. We don't have our staff people here today, but that's where I'd love to see us go and do that parallel with Jelane's and Monticello's and Highlands, everyone's ongoing research.
But at what point is it the HRC and at what point is it the city? Because we are only advisory.
Right.
And we have a much more limited budget, but.
I would see us, and I would even be happy to make a motion to say, could we ask for, or ask to use a small portion of our funds to have a work session with a designer to try to look at those spaces that we put up on the map today and maybe where they link. She talked about the procession. I remember Frank talking about that in the design process early on from the UVA site, and we have the Jefferson School, and we have Vinegar Hill and others, just to kind of have that conversation so that we could see where the geography lies and how we might link up with that with a pretty small budget to just try to focus our thoughts somewhere, or we will never have a place and a product if we don't do that. And I love the idea of that she introduced of something decentralized as a way to help us deal with our spatial constraints.
Yeah, and that fits in with a lot of the research and the ads that I've done that, I haven't kept track exactly, but about half of the sales were on the estates in Albemarle County.
Yes.
And then about half were at of the remaining half, about a half of those were at the courthouse, and then the other quarter of the total sales were distributed among the 3 taverns and the Benson space. So like having it as a distributed model sort of works with where the dehumanization actually happened. And I think, I've sort of characterized it as the block is sort of has been the focus for a long time and is seen as like, pointing at that's the evil spot. Everywhere else is okay. And I think Dr. Wilson brought up the fact that like this is, in everywhere. It's pervasive during that time period, and that it wasn't just one place. So I think it helps distribute it more and say like, yeah, this was everywhere in antebellum Albemarle society.
And right now in the preservation community, we're starting to become more and more interested in free Black communities that had their origins before the Civil War as individuals or families acquired freedom in various ways through bequests, through their own labor and purchase. We don't know enough about that story as well. That narrative also begins at the courthouse when that is recorded. And so this is a story with many tentacles out into other places in our community. And those of you who were on CVHR yesterday saw some of those communities in Albemarle County. We don't really know when those started. Did they start in 1810 or 1830 or 1868? We don't know, but there are these really very human and really great stories that we can also link to. And this, so coming up with something decentralized lets us deal with a lot of suppressed history in our region.
Which was really my point in trying to bring up the fact that right there at Court Square on Three Notched Road, on your Main Street, right by Lee Park with Social Hall, you've got that story of the free community who were, biologically linked with the enslaved community. And then there were those who had been free for generations. And you got sort of basically three populations with different but very linked stories. And you're right, starting about 1840, 50, whatever it is, when Virginia made it harder and harder and harder to be a free person of color, and which is why there was that huge exodus among those individuals we know linked to Monticello to go to Ohio. I mean, it's a fascinating story, and it is all linked. You do have to decide at some point where do you stop, but where do you start?
So Jenny, back to I think the original thrust that you were getting at with your question. I certainly think it would be appropriate for us to spend funds to do that. And I think it would also, more importantly, be within our scope of what we hope to present to council to identify sites that are related to this. So, that would sort of be in addition to our previously stated goals of providing a significant amount of compiled existing and new research to council, and providing the descendant feedback, and then identifying a set of sites that would be candidates for different types of memorialization.
Yeah, I like that idea too. And like, it sounded like it was so fruitful with UVA. I didn't know that backstory about, I knew that there was some debate about where to put it, on the lawn or outside. But I didn't realize that hadn't been selected before they chose the designer. And yeah, that really is a big risk to take. I wonder if the city would, be willing to do that. There's a lot of sites we could go with here, or this, kind of distributed model or something. But I like the thought of her, kind of coming, and it's nice because she already knows our community. She knows what this, but I don't know if she could actually, come in person. That would be ideal. What's going on with COVID, I don't know, but it would be nice to just kind of have a walkthrough and just to think of things, and have, city staff there as well, involved in this, kind of looking around. And so, yeah, I wonder if we could propose to city council, that we do this, and invite city staff and council along too, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Part of their intention was to connect with the community. So in many ways, this is continuity from that project to this one, because that one is focused on the value of the enslaved labor at the university, and this will be more about the legal process of slavery and how that was involved in our community. So I would love to see us move forward with that. And like I said, I'm happy to make a motion. I don't know really what it says, but to ask Phil to try to draft some communication with our staff that we could present to be able to contract to try to just get this off the ground.
Yeah, I think we can. We have
a preliminary concept design or evaluation of potential sites and linkages, something like that. It's not, not really big. It's more kind of like, I hate to use the term, but it's maybe more like a fact finding and a charrette to just look at these spaces that we might have available to us right now, that we know are closely associated with enslaved sales.
Yeah, I think we can. It'll probably only happen if we use our own money, which we have available. Yeah. And so I think we can just do that. We'll I mean, we don't have to do this right now, but we can think about what the language is and what more precisely we want to do, and have a motion or.
Well, we have to have the blessing
Discussion.
of the city. You don't do it without the blessing of the city. You don't do it behind their backs. They should say yes. They should say yes, but we have to be careful of our,
Well, I think, yeah, we need to talk with, and Missy's here, so she could probably relay this to Jeff and Robert, and we go through the appropriate process to undertake something that's more than $300 for someone to come and talk with us.
Okay,
It would be really helpful. I mean, if we had had her here in person and we could have all sat down and looked at the map or walked around that geography and maybe over to Vinegar Hill and the Jefferson School and back to the university, I know we would have had something gelling by the end of that time. And that's what I would love to see us do.
yeah, that sounds good. Okay, we're getting towards the end of our time. So I think unless, does anybody have any other final comments about that, or Dr. Wilson's?
Well, I like to paint with a broad brush. I'd take on the whole world if I could. So the other takeaway that I have from her comments was to talk about the market situation in Washington, which hit me like, duh, we've been working for so many years on the Shako Memorial for the market in Richmond. So do we want to play some connective or leadership role in Charlottesville with other places where there were markets or auctions? Is that something that we need to have a network that's sort of like EJI? And we're collaborating with others, and perhaps people are taking pilgrimage routes, or they are, it's a new kind of cultural tourism that is responding to the issues and topics of our day. I just want to throw that out there for some connective tissue, perhaps with those other places and other groups. It's just too much to not bring it out, I think.
Right. And this is where if we have Professor Ann Bailey come and talk to us, she's the author of The Weeping Time, which is about that huge, the largest ever sale of enslaved persons in the US. If she can come talk with us, she might have more information about, are there kind of networks of folks that are looking at this? I know that up there and somewhere in Northern Virginia, where there was, a very large, well, must have been in Arlington, because, once they outlawed the trade in the district itself, it kind of decamped across the border into Virginia. But I know that there's work being done there at a slave, there's some little museum, I think, that was made out of a pen, where people were held for
I
sale.
think it's in Alexandria.
Alexandria, that's what it is.
Alexandria, yeah.
Right. Yeah, so there's, and there's probably other people, that I'm not aware of, and, and maybe Professor Bailey, has the knowledge of that and could connect us, because there is kind of, well, like for instance, in Charleston, South Carolina, the slave mart, the old slave mart that they have, and it's a former auction house that they've made into a museum there. So I think you're right. You're onto something here, Jenny, that this isn't just going on here, it's going on in lots of places. And just as there's a network of universities studying slavery, that's headquartered at UVA, and there's 36 member institutions or something like that, maybe there's something that's afoot on this issue somewhere, but it's worth learning, I think, checking out.
So I think that's just something we keep in the back of our minds and look for those opportunities, whether they're funding or just networking, I don't know. But great session. Thank you, everyone, for going on this journey to reach out and bring other experts into our little group.
Okay, on On to announcements. Are there any announcements of events or other things coming up? I just had two things. One is, I don't know if everybody's seen the publication of My Monticello by Jocelyn Johnson, local author. I had the privilege of reading an early draft of the titular short story, and it was very impactful and incorporates a lot of local history, and I've seen quite a lot of national publicity for the book, and then I hope that it will revitalize another round of interest in the complete history of Monticello. And then
And
the
it'll
other-
be a Netflix. It'll be
Oh,
on
right,
Netflix
yeah.
as well.
There's a Netflix contract out. And we'll
Amazing, yeah.
probably see that also. I mean,
She's an art teacher here at well, she was at Johnson.
she was
Elementary School.
before getting a book contract.
Before, yeah, now she's a full-time, award-winning author, yeah.
It was a
Um,
short story, Phil, before?
Yes, it's a collection of short stories. And the other thing was there's an exhibit at New City Arts right now, including Sandy Williams IV, who's out of Richmond, that has a local historical relevance. One of his works is based on a cross burning that occurred in the mid 20th century in Charlottesville, and that's at New City Arts Gallery, I believe, for the next 3 or 4 weeks. Okay, with that, I guess we'll conclude the October HRC meeting. Oh, okay, yes.
We might just want to, I was quickly trying to look for the timing of it, but the Robert Reed exhibit at the Jefferson School. And Robert Reed was from Charlottesville and a really acclaimed artist who's now dead. And anyway, I recommend that to people to go see.
Good idea.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
Mm,
See you next month.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yep.